If you remember back when we studied the book of Numbers, we talked about how Moses sent 12 spies into the land of Canaan to scout it out and see if the Israelites could go in and conquer it. 10 of the spies came back saying, no, the people there are too powerful, the cities are too fortified, we can't do it, we may as well go back to Egypt. But 2 of the spies remained faithful and said, yes, God has given us this land, let's go in and take it. One of those spies was Joshua, about whom we're studying now. He became the new leader of the Israelites and led them in conquering Canaan. But have you ever wondered what happened to the other spy? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hello, welcome to this week's lesson. I'm Brian Vermeer, and we're continuing our series in the book of Joshua. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 14, skipping ahead quite a bit, going past all the conquests. I encourage you to read the book of Joshua and find out how they conquered the rest of the land of Canaan. But now we're getting to the part where Joshua is dividing the land up among the tribes of Israel. Before I begin, I'd like to remind you, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the Mr. Vermeer's Class YouTube page. And if you can, please support Mr. Vermeer's Class on Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can help support this ministry, help me make new and better videos. And you get access to many exclusive videos and audio that is not available here on the YouTube channel. All right, so we're in Joshua chapter 14. The conquering is almost over. There's still some little pockets of resistance that the Israelites will need to conquer, but Joshua's time as leader over the united tribes of Israel is now coming to an end, and he's dividing the land of Canaan up among the 12 tribes. So our first reading is in Joshua chapter 14, verses 1 to 5, and let's see how he does this dividing. It says, the Israelites received these portions that the priest Eleazar, Joshua the son of Nun, and the family heads of the Israelite tribes gave them in the land of Canaan. Their inheritance was by lot, as the Lord commanded through Moses, for the 9.5 tribes, because Moses had given the inheritance to the 2.5 tribes beyond the Jordan. But he gave no inheritance among them to the Levites. The descendants of Joseph became 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. No portion of the land was given to the Levites except cities to live in, along with pasture lands for their cattle and livestock. So the Israelites did as the Lord commanded Moses, and they divided the land. So now that they've got a good foothold within the land of Canaan, Joshua is saying, we're going to divide up this land among the tribes, and you're going to have to go through now and drive out the rest of the Canaanites on your own. I'm no longer going to be your leader. We're no longer going to basically be a united, nation. You need to go each take care of your own lands that we're giving you. It says they divided these portions by lot. That is, they divided up the land. We don't know exactly. By lot simply means doing something that involves, some kind of randomness, like throwing dice, drawing straws, something like that. We do know that the land was divided also according to the population of the tribes. The larger tribes that had more people got more land than the tribes that didn't have as many people. Judah got a very large allotment. Benjamin got a very small allotment because there weren't that many of them. And notice carefully, it says they divided this among the 9.5 tribes. And you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought there were 12 tribes of Israel. Well, before they crossed the Jordan, the tribes of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh said, we like the land over here on the eastern side of the Jordan. So if you don't mind, we'd like to just settle here. And Joshua said, well, that's fine. You can settle here as long as your men come across the Jordan with us and help to conquer the land of Canaan. And then when it's done, then you can go back and settle back on this side. So 2.5 tribes have already received their allotment of land. And now that most of the fighting is over, they're going to go back and settle that. So the remainder of the land of Canaan now has to be divided among 9.5 tribes. Also, something interesting here, it says, no inheritance was given to the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi did not receive any land. Well, why is that? Why did God not give any land to the Levites? Instead, he kind of separates the tribe of Levi from the rest of Israel, and he divides the tribe of Joseph between Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. So that way there's still 12 tribes plus the tribe of Levi. Well, the reason for this is because, when you read Leviticus, parts of Exodus and Leviticus, you find out that the Levites were separated from the rest of Israel for special service to God. If you were born into the tribe of Levi, then your job was to help serve in the tabernacle, or to be a spiritual leader among the people, to be a Bible teacher, to be a spiritual leader, just to help out the people with spiritual matters. And they would take turns serving in the tabernacle based according to their clans. So the tribe of Levi was set apart by God for this special service. So as such, they don't get any land. Instead, what happens is each of the 12 tribes is to set aside a few cities for the Levites who would be serving among their tribe. So the Levites would be scattered among the 12, kind of like preachers going out to different churches within all the areas. And they would have special cities within those tribes for them to live in. So each tribe would set aside a few of their cities for the Levites to live in, and these Levites would then serve among the people of that tribe. It says also, interestingly enough, that they would not just give the Levites the city, they would also give the Levites the pasture land around that city, 1,500 feet out from the city. So the Levites would have a place to raise their own livestock, their own cattle and sheep, and so on. Also, 6 of these cities were to be designated especially as something called cities of refuge. And this is something very interesting. The 6 cities of refuge were to be used in case somebody was accused of murder. Because you see, at that time, if someone was found murdered, and let's say I was thought of as a suspect in that murder, if I was in fact the leading suspect in that murder, the closest relative of the victim would come after me for revenge and would try to kill me. So God says, take 6 of these Levite cities and designate them cities of refuge. These are places that someone who is accused of murder can go to and live within that city, kind of like a sanctuary. He can be safe within that city from the avenger of blood, it's called, until he is able to be put on trial. Now, if he's put on trial and found guilty, then of course he would be executed just like, the law prescribes. But it just gives a safe place for a person accused of murder to go to until his trial. To give him a safe place where he doesn't have to worry about one of the victim's relatives trying to exact revenge on him. So that's what happened to the Levites. That's why they were not given any land. Instead, they were given a certain amount of cities for the Levites to live in while they are doing their duties and serving God. All right. Now, we talked about in the teaser about the 12 spies that originally scouted out the land of Jericho. And if you remember, 10 of those spies back 40 years before, not the city of Jericho, the land of Canaan, the whole land of Canaan. These 12 spies went into the land of Canaan, scouted it out. They said, yes, there's a lot of great stuff within this land. There's a lot of good food, a lot of great crops, a lot of good pasture land and all. But 10 of the spies said, but we can't conquer that land because the people there are too powerful. The cities are too well fortified, and we just can't do it. And because of that, God made the Israelites wander in the wilderness for 40 years until every man over the age of 20 had died. And that way there'd be a new generation who would go in and actually conquer the land of Canaan. And that's what we've been reading in Joshua, is how this new generation is going in and conquering it. However, 2 of the spies said, yes, God has given us this land, we can go in and take it. But the rest of the Israelites all turned against those two. Well, who were those two faithful spies? One of them was Joshua. And we've seen what happened to Joshua. He became Moses' successor. He became the leader of the Israelites after Moses died, and he's the one who's been leading the Israelites in conquering this land of Canaan. But what about the other spy? The book of Numbers says his name was Caleb. And God said he would also live long enough to go in and help conquer the land of Canaan. Joshua and Caleb would be the only two men over the age of 20 that would live through the wandering in the wilderness and actually be there and able to possess the land. So whatever happened to him? Well, we're going to find out now in our next reading here. Joshua chapter 14, let's look at verses 6 through 9. It says, the descendants of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord promised Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the Lord's servant, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to scout the land, and I brought back an honest report. My brothers who went with me caused the people to lose heart, but I followed the Lord my God completely. On that day Moses swore to me, the land where you've set foot will be an inheritance for you and your descendants forever, because you have followed the Lord my God completely. So here we see that the writer of the book of Joshua, if it wasn't Joshua himself, it was someone who was writing the book anyway, remembered Caleb. And he remembered that Caleb was one of those 12 spies. And he's reporting now what happened to Caleb. Caleb survived all through the 40 years in the wilderness. Caleb has now been helping Joshua to conquer the land of Israel, or the land of Canaan, which will become the land of Israel. And most likely, I would think Caleb would be one of Joshua's advisors, one of his right-hand men. So Caleb is now coming to Joshua. Again, now most of the conquering is over. And he's dividing up the land among the 12 tribes. And Caleb is coming to Joshua and saying, hey, you remember, I was also one of those two faithful spies. Remember you and me? We were the only two that said, let's go ahead and go in and take this land. He said, no, all the others, including some of my relatives, they all said, nope, we can't do it. So Moses swore to me and to you, Joshua, that the land where you set foot will be an inheritance for you and your descendants forever, because you followed God completely. He said, God has promised to give me personally an allotment of land within this land of Canaan. So he says, no, God promised this to us. Remember that. I was 40 years old at that time. It's now 45 years later. So Caleb is now 85 years old. Joshua is at least that old. He's just asking Joshua, remember what God promised us. Remember what God promised you and me. He said we would survive the 40 years in the wilderness. And we have. Everyone else over the age of 20 would die, except you and me. Which is interesting, because what that means now is Joshua and Caleb are at least 20 years older than everybody else among all the Israelites. That's just kind of an interesting thought there. But he says, remember God's promise. I would like you to honor God's promise to me. I've been helping you. I've stayed faithful through the 40 years in the desert. I've stayed faithful throughout this whole, conquering that we've been doing. And now I would like to receive my reward. And, there are times when there's nothing wrong with that. When wanting what you have earned. This isn't a case of saying, gimme, God promised me, so give this to me. This is a case of, God said this would happen. And all of this has happened. And God said that I would get a reward at the end. Well, now it's the end. So I just want what I've earned. I want you to fulfill God's promise and give me a piece of land that I can call my own. Well, let's see how Joshua answers that now, looking at verses 10 to 15. Caleb, still speaking, says, "As you see, the Lord has kept me alive these 45 years as he promised, since the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel was journeying in the wilderness. Here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as I was the day Moses sent me out. My strength for battle and daily tasks is now as it was then. Now give me this hill country the Lord promised me on that day, because you heard then that the Anakim are there, as well as large fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord promised." Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as an inheritance. Therefore Hebron still belongs to Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, as an inheritance today, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, completely. Hebron's name used to be Kiriath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. After this, the land had rest from war. So see Caleb saying, no, here it is, 45 years later, after we, brought back that good report and after God made this promise to us. I'm 85 years old. I'm still just as strong as I was then. And that's entirely possible. I've seen some, 85-year-old men who are, really in good shape. My grandfather was a farmer, and he died at age 96. And physically, I think he was still just in as good shape as he was, 40 years, before that. He was still a big, strong, man at that time. He says, I'm still just as strong as I was that day. My strength for battle and for daily tasks, I can still do everything now that I was able to do back then. I'm not just some old, feeble, senile man. He says, so give me this hill country. This is the piece of land that I want. I want this hill country. And I feel like I've earned that. I feel like, I have a right to say, to be able to choose, what land I'm given, instead of it just being divided up by lot like everybody else. And again, there's not, it may sound selfish at times, but sometimes there's not anything wrong with that. He says, give me this land. You heard that the Anakim are there. Now, who are the Anakim? The Anakim are the descendants of Anak. Anak was rumored to be a giant. We don't really know that much about him, but he was rumored to be a giant, and it is said that the Anakim were a very large people, a very strong, large people. And they were one of the reasons why 40 years before, the Israelites weren't ready to go in and conquer the land. Because they said, the Anakim are there. We can't fight them. They're too big. They're too strong. And now Caleb is saying, bring them on. Give me that piece of land where you've heard that they live. And he says, and perhaps God will be with me and I will drive them out. He's not even saying, I know God will be with me and I'll drive them out. He's saying, perhaps, give me this land like God promised. And I think God will help me to take it. I'm not asking for your help to conquer it. I just want the right to it. If I'm able to conquer it, I want that to be my land. So Joshua gives it to him. It says, Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him the city of Hebron. Hebron is a city where Abraham had lived. It's an important city to the Israelites. And Caleb was able to drive out the Anakim that lived there. It says this land still belongs to Caleb and his descendants today. Again, another place where we see, we've seen a few places here in the book of Joshua where it says, and so it still is today, or so this person still lives there today. Another piece of evidence within the book which lets us think that the book of Joshua was written right at that time, or at least not too long afterwards, while these people were still alive. And that's an important thing, because what that tells us is the book is saying, if you don't believe what you read in this book, go ask these people. They're still alive. And that also shows us that the book of Joshua was written very early. It was written at the time that the events in it occurred. Because there's a lot of people around today that try to tell you, you can't trust the Bible because the Bible was written hundreds or thousands of years after the events occurred. We don't even know if those things are true. They're just telling stories. Well, here's the book of Joshua telling us, no, these things happened just a few years ago, at the most. And you remember them. And you can still go talk to these people who'll tell you about them. And that also tells us then that the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, must have already been written before that. Because the book of Joshua several times says they referred to the law, to the scriptures. And those are the books that give us the law. So the Bible is older than most skeptics who try to have you think it is. It was written at the time. It was written by people who were there. So it knows what it's talking about. We can trust what it says because it was written by eyewitnesses. It's not just stories written down hundreds of years after they occurred. The Bible relates true events that happened to real people at real places in history. So here we see that God keeps his promise. Even a promise he made 45 years before. When Joshua and Caleb were young, I say young, 40 years old. To me, that's young. I wish I was 40 again. God made a promise to them. You're going to live through the 40 years of wandering in the desert. You're going to conquer the land of Canaan, and I'm going to give each of you a special inheritance within that land. And now 45 years later, God is keeping that promise. Caleb is coming to Joshua and say, I want to claim my piece of land that God promised me. God promises us a lot of things, and sometimes all we have to do is just claim it. God wants to give you great things, but sometimes you have to ask for them. The Bible says that the Lord knows what you need, even before you ask him. Jesus himself said that to us. So why do we have to ask? Why doesn't God just give us everything if he wants to? Because God is the good father. A good father doesn't just give his kid everything the kid wants. A good father gives his child what the child needs and will occasionally bless the child with greater gifts. But a good father also waits for the child to ask, because that shows dependence. That shows the child that you can't always just receive everything. You have to work for it. You have to sometimes do things in order to get what you want. You have to earn the things that you want. And sometimes all you have to do is simply just ask for them. God wants to give you great things, but you need to ask. And there's no harm in asking, because there's only 3 ways that God can answer. He can say yes, he can say no, or he can say wait a bit. So if you want something, if there's something that you feel you need, if there's something you feel, I don't want to say that you deserve, because all we deserve is hell. But if there's something that you want God to bless you with, ask him. The worst he'll do is say no. And if he says no, it's because he knows that there's better things for you. See, we're like the child. The child doesn't always know what it needs. The child just knows what it wants. Well, what does the child want? The child wants whatever bright and shiny new things it sees in the store window. The child wants what everybody else has. The child wants whatever is popular at the time. But that's not always what's best for the child. And God knows what is best for us. And God knows what he wants to give us. Sometimes God will give us those things that he knows are not best, because we persistently ask him, and he'll say, fine, if you really want it, I'll give it to you, although it's not great. It's not going to be as good as you think it is. And then we suffer the results. The old saying, be careful what you ask for, you might get it. So when you ask God, be sure to say, God, if it's your will, if it's what you want, then this is what I would like. The Bible says you don't have because you don't ask. Caleb went to Joshua and he asked. And Joshua gave him what he wanted, fulfilling God's promise to Caleb. And Caleb went there and he conquered the land and he took it. He still had to work for it. And that's something we need to remember too. Sometimes God will say, okay, you can have this, but I'm going to make you work for it. You've still got to actually go and get it. You've still got to do certain things in order to take it, in order to claim it. So don't be surprised if you ask God for something and he says, okay, you can have it. But be prepared to do this and this and this in order to get it. Just how bad do you really want it? Are you willing to work to get it? Next week, we're going to be finishing up the book of Joshua. We're going to look at Joshua's farewell address to the people of Israel. He's going to give them some blessings. He's also going to give them some warnings about the times that are to come. And after that, we're going to go into a short study of the book of Judges, which comes right after Joshua in the Bible and is kind of a direct sequel to it. So, hope you've enjoyed this. Again, please support me on Patreon if you can. And I'll see you next week.